Yes, madam.
Take the boy to the kitchen, Lynch. Give him some ice cream. You may give him a piece of cake, too. Go along.
Thank Mrs. Ivers, Wally.
Thank you, Mrs. Ivers.
If you love listening to this show, please consider giving a rating and a review on Amazon Alexa or wherever you listen. We want to continue bringing you this amazing content, and part of our ability to do that means that we need a big audience. Now, it may not seem like much, but rating and reviewing the show will help more people find us, just like how you found this show. Simply on any podcast platform, search for our show, scroll down to the bottom, and push 5 stars. It's that easy. Thanks for supporting the show. Today, I'm joined by Ian Rosenberger, who is the founder and CEO of Work, First Mile, and Day Owl. Thanks for joining today.
Thanks so much for having me.
So I think there's a kind of an important moment where during the Haiti's earthquake, or maybe shortly after, I guess, how were you involved in that kind of rescue and some of the operational aspects, and how did that event prompt you to take action?
Yeah, it's a good question. I got involved with Haiti immediately after the earthquake. I'd say within a couple of weeks. I was in a different job and a different life. I worked in marketing and storytelling. Before that, I was in television production, so I was wholly unequipped to go to Haiti and spend time there. But I was a little unhappy with what I was doing, and I knew I wanted to get involved in somehow with something that had an impact. I just didn't know what. So I did exactly what I tell people not to do. As I got on a plane and I showed up and went right to the heart of what was going on, and not knowing what I was doing and being curious and naive, I think are many times my greatest assets, and I think all entrepreneurs' greatest assets. I think the world's evolved a little bit more since 2010, and I think we've learned that we don't want to. There's one thing to be excited about helping out, and there's another thing to go and just look at what's happening. Kind of that disaster porn idea. But I went and I took photos, and the idea originally was that I was going to sell the photos to raise money, show people what was happening in Haiti, the attention or lack thereof of a disaster of such a massive scale. It was fascinating to me. What I didn't know, and what I learned immediately, was how broken the system for recovery was around economic development, how few jobs there were available to the poor, and how nonprofits, while well-meaning, were wholly unequipped to deliver the goods and services that were required for true economic development, and to solve things like absolute poverty. And that was just mind-blowing to me. I'd never come across anything like that before. So I wrote in my journal on my first trip, if Haiti could turn trash into money equals good, because I saw so much trash on the ground and I saw so much poverty. And I tried to figure out how I might connect those two things. And over 2 years and thousands of conversations with the poor, I developed a philosophy around economic development with the absolutely poor, and a philosophy around how we might collect waste and turn it into a renewable resource. And then, sure enough, here we are, 8, 9, 10 years later.
Yeah, I think what makes your experience very fascinating is that when we look at some of these kind of structural and infrastructure and really system-based shortcomings, essentially market inefficiencies, these are really difficult things to overcome. And they're highly complex. It's you can't really necessarily pinpoint any one person, and saying that the government's at fault is just really kind of more scapegoating than anything else that's productive.
Yeah.
But really, everything from their energy ability to move from centralized to decentralized energy grid, to the ability to, just even handle just the garbage and to remove the debris so they can start to rebuild again. Just a ton of lack of infrastructures and processes. And of course, I think there's a fundamental difference of NGOs and aid versus really economic sustainable development, which is
Yeah.
what you're referring to. I want to laser focus on the uniqueness of landfill communities. Who are they? How are they relying on the landfills? And what is your organization work doing to employ those communities?
Sure. Well, you started that question by talking about the difference between nonprofits and economic development, and you're exactly right. I think you're an economist, so you have a keen understanding of why those things are true. But nonprofits, their missions are just not aligned towards development. Their missions are aligned towards filling in holes. They're pothole fillers, right? And that's a really important service that nonprofits deliver. That sometimes government can't deliver and sometimes business can't deliver. But in the low income world, our greatest resource is people, and our greatest opportunity is in the renewable resources that those areas can push through. And I actually think that that places like Haiti, low income countries, low income communities globally, have a really incredible opportunity to leapfrog traditional technologies and infrastructure development that I think have gotten backwards in places like the United States. And I think recycling is a really, really good example of that. Landfill management is another really good example of that. In the US, as it turns out, and the studies have just come out recently that have shown that the US is actually way, way more responsible for ocean-bound plastic and trash than we originally thought. And we think that we have a terrific waste management infrastructure here. When in reality, we've got several waste cartels that push waste into landfills really inefficiently, and actually also hold the keys towards the recycling infrastructure in the U.S. So I looked at Haiti and places like it as a blank slate, as an opportunity to leapfrog from traditional burn and bury infrastructure to what if we could create either a decentralized or a recycling-based waste infrastructure that could actually deliver an 80, 90% recycle rate. And what if we could create a system where waste was valued from the get-go and never actually made it into a landfill? So your question goes back to like, why do we work on landfills and what's a landfill community that look like, and et cetera. And when we went to Haiti, and the closer and closer I got to landfills, the poorer and poorer people got. So there was a direct correlation between, a poverty level and how close you live to trash, which, psychologically makes a lot of sense. Nobody wants to live near a landfill, and if you're forced to live there, then you must, be in a pretty disadvantageous position. But what was also striking to me was the both business acumen, the perseverance, the scrappiness, and the grit that was displayed by the people in those communities. A lot of creativity, an incredible amount of general business awareness, but none of the tools or the access required for success. And I really just looked at it and said, how can we equip people without these tools that clearly have the ability, but just don't have the agency to make their own decisions? And that's all we did. We just looked at the landfill communities. We took census. We figured out how many kids were working in the landfill, how many adults, where they lived, what they were prone to, just a lot of data. And ultimately what we found is, in an average landfill like Port-au-Prince's, which is about the size of Philadelphia, you've got 200-300 kids living on a landfill. Why are they there? Well, that's an economic decision that their parents made, right? It's nothing more than that. A mom or dad can't make enough to put food on the table, so they pull their kid out of school and they say, pick up 25 pounds of trash because we can make a couple of cents a pound. And I just think that's a crappy way to have to live. So we started looking for what opportunities are there for industry to help bring value to this, because nonprofits, donations, they're not going to last. Like, that's going to go up and down with the economy. But if an industry can come in and help us, then we can connect the dots here. And we started to do that. At first it was with textile companies like Timberland, retail companies. And eventually HP signed on and started making printer cartridges with our recycled plastic bottles and the people we serve. And now our expertise is truly around connecting multinational organizations who are looking for sourcing solutions. They're not looking necessarily for a sustainability solution. They're looking for, how do we get more recycled plastic into our goods that we don't get from North America or Europe? And so they're looking at us and saying, can you help us? And we say, sure, we've got all these sourcing solutions in Haiti and Honduras and Taiwan and Indonesia, Vietnam. So that's a long answer to a short question, but I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, so I'm thinking about it, and I think my response is that when we look at a circumstance, we think in terms of, like I said, resources,
Yeah.
capital resource, people resource, intellectual IP resource, technology resource, and in the kinds of places that you guys are active, Haiti and other places throughout the world, one of the things that is abundant are really the people. So you're really taking a crowdsourcing approach. Now, with that, of course, abundance, it doesn't mean that abundance of people necessarily equates to a system. And I think that system of interlocking strategy wasn't there in place, specifically making sure you bridge the local commodity, to the actual conglomerates or the enterprises that would actually source it and incorporate it into their product development. So, to actually help put that circular economy in place is critical. And to that extent, can you explain about how your entity works with the entity First Mile and Day Owl?
Yeah.
And what do they do, and how are they organized?
Yeah.
And how are they, for profit and not for profit?
Yeah, of course. This is a question I love talking about because I think the structure of governance when it comes to business and nonprofits as we solve global problems is really important. And when I started I started the nonprofit first. Work came along at first, and the reason it came along first is because as I was working through these communities, I was getting more and more people who were coming to me and they were saying, "I would really love a job. I want my kids to have a better life than I had, and I want to go to work." But it was clear that they were in no position to go to work because they were either in this, really poor housing situation, or had a really acute health issue, or had, really poor access to just baseline food. Many had deep debt that, a regular job wouldn't have cleared. And that's how you get lots of really big problems in the low income world, is you get these, what I call the hole, right? And it's the hole of poverty, and you need to be able to fill in the hole before somebody could kind of walk out of poverty forever. So you need to make sure that a family has access to the kind of Maslow's hierarchy before they can be successful. And only once they fill in the hole will a job be actually useful to them. So the nonprofits endeavored to do that. And then my goal was the graduation from that program was going to be a job. And then I looked around and, I learned, it sounds obvious, but at the time I just didn't know anything, that the reason that nobody was being placed into jobs, people weren't working, is because the unemployment rate was so high. So then it was like, okay, well, we're going to need a partner here that understands business. So I started thinking about what businesses we might bring to partner with us. But nobody really wanted to do it. So I was like, well, we're going to need to create these jobs ourselves, I suppose. So then I created the business as a means of job creation for the nonprofit. Once a family would get out of the poverty hole, then they could get employed in waste collection or this waste system that we developed. And then, that worked for quite some time. I had a nonprofit that was preparing people for jobs, and then I had a for-profit that was preparing jobs for people. And we used that system for 4 or 5 years. We developed our first 6 to 10 partnerships out of it with, mostly textile and apparel brands. But then I just got, over time, we were helping these apparel brands get better. And I principally wanted to get involved in apparel and accessories because I think that they can make a big difference in terms of, cleaning up their industry. It's one of the dirtiest industries in the world. But as it turns out, they're just really, really slow to adopt the practices they need to account for the externalities that exist for the environment and for people. So I was just getting frustrated. And eventually I realized that rather than trying to just help those businesses along, that we were going to need to set an example for how a retail business can operate in 2020. So I created Day Owl as a model for a circular business. So Day Owl is a direct consumer business that makes backpacks out of trash from the first mile, and is set up to demonstrate how a circular brand might exist in 2020. So those three are all First Mile and Day Owl are both business lines under one business, and then the nonprofit exists as a support infrastructure. The business is a benefit corporation. The nonprofit is a 501c3. they're mutually beneficial to one another's social and environmental impact programming. The business at times uses the nonprofit as a consulting arm. Like they offer expertise on social and environmental impact programming. They're an implementer. When big multinationals come to us, the for-profit assesses and maps supply chains, monitors supply chains, but all the implementation is done through the nonprofit partner. So a multinational can actually align its philanthropy with its supply chain in ways that are productive for both people and the business's bottom line.
So we've had some interesting guests on our show that have had a number of different kind of hybrid approaches. I think yours is probably more of the elaborate governance model. But I think one of the things that we've heard kind of a lash back on some of these models is that whether it's for-profit, nonprofit, though the story is very meaningful, are we in effect really just exploiting the people that are in the most extreme conditions? How would you respond to something like that that's coming out of the public?
Yeah, I mean, if you want my honest opinion, I think that's a kind of a bullshit response. Like, I think that I think it's actually really arrogant for brands who make things with no consideration for people and planet to criticize people who have been in the trenches trying to figure out how to make the air cleaner and the water cleaner and give people jobs. Come along and say, "Oh, we're just exploiting these people." I'm not sure brands understand who's doing the exploiting, because the simple fact is the vast majority of businesses out there have no concern for people or planet in the way they make their goods. They have concern for one thing: how much money can it save me, and how much money can it make me? And what we're endeavoring to create is supply chains for brands that both make them more money and increase the amount of impact they can have on people on the planet. I think that, there are some brands who are better at it than others. Some brands genuinely care about externalities. I think all brands should care, because I think if you think economically around the center of profit over the next 50 years, accounting for a world that does not have unlimited resources is going to be a cold reality for many businesses. Again, you're an economist. I'm sure you know this territory well better than me, but I think that long-term planning does not play well into a system in which we owe quarterly results. And I think that we have a responsibility as businesses to demonstrate to our shareholders that we can exist for the long term, not just for the next 3 months at a time. And I think that's a big hindrance to businesses making decisions around accounting for environmental and social externalities. As a benefit corporation business person, and as the chairman of the board of a nonprofit that it seeks to pick up trash and make sure people have jobs, I would say that they're welcome to throw stones. Anybody who wants to throw stones at a model like that is welcome to, but I would just invite them to come look at it and see. Like, you tell me if you think it's exploitation. I'll say we've had brands who look, whether you like it or not, if you're using recycled material in 2020, chances are there are kids in your supply chain. Like, period. Like, as an expert in the field, somebody who's been in the trenches for the past 10 years in recycled materials, if you use recycled materials and you're a business today, I would almost guarantee that there are children picking up bottles in your supply chain. Now, you can spend a lot of time and energy trying to figure out how to find a supply chain that doesn't have kids in it, or you could actually address the problem, which is like, how do we ensure that plastic recovery supply chains don't need to have children in them? And you'd be surprised at how many brands don't want to talk about child labor, and they just want it to go away. And I would say that that's changing, and that now brands are starting to say, well, how do I engage with this, and how do I become the brand that champions ending child labor in my supply chain?
So we only have 1 minute left, and I wanted to briefly explore this notion of sustainable economic development. And I think many times, some of the best case studies that are out there tends to be more local and organic based versus a multinational or external party coming in and trying to develop on their behalf. So can you talk about the ownership aspects of how you envision the collective work that you guys are doing, how that will actually foster new businesses that are actually owned by the local natives, that are operated by them, that profit from that, and become self-sustaining, right? And then the other aspect is job creation for themselves. Perennial scrappiness converting into actual commercialization for them.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the center of this entire thing is about humans being able to make a better income. We believe that social justice is tied to environmental justice. Those two things cannot be, extracted from one another. That the building blocks of dignity are agency and choice. So my job is not to come in and exact a solution on a group of working people who've been there for a long time. My job is to go in and ask a lot of questions and facilitate the growth of that group of people so they can reach the goals that they want to go reach. And I do that by connecting organizations who have the resources to shine a spotlight and dollars into supply chains that for too long have been neglected. And I think that over time, like once we develop a supply chain, first, we don't employ anybody. People employ themselves. We just facilitate their growth. So like the people that are working in the supply chains, they are committed to their own businesses, and we're just helping them improve their businesses. So it's already owned by collectors. And I think, we like to help facilitate those relationships and then get out of the way. And I think to a large extent, we've been really successful at that. 120 million plastic bottles later, we're, chugging along and hoping to do lots more.
Great. So on that note, we've been joined by Ian Rosenberger, who is the CEO of Work, First Mile, and Day Owl. Thanks for joining today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
If you've enjoyed this episode, take a moment to rate our show on any podcast platform that you listen to. Scroll down to the bottom and push 5 stars. It's that easy. And as always, thanks for listening.